The dust swirled, a bitter veil clinging to Mara's worn dress as she knelt before Master Thorn. His polished boots were the last thing her daughters, huddled behind her like frightened quail, would remember of their mother's final plea. "Take my life, Master." Mara's voice was a ragged whisper, yet it carried across the unnatural hush of Thorn's forecourt, a place accustomed to bartering souls and breaking spirits. "Take it. But spare my daughters. From hunger." From this her hand, thin and trembling, gestured vaguely at the bleak compound, at the leering faces of Thorn's men. Lila, the eldest at 16, bit her lip until blood purled, her eyes fixed on Thorn's impassive face. Sarah, 13, clutched a fold of Lila's skirt, her gaze darting, absorbing every cruel detail. Little Ilara, barely 8, had buried her face in Lila's side, her small body racked with silent sobs. Thorn, a man built stout and hard like an old oak, considered Mara. His eyes, cold as winter river stones, flickered over the girls. A commodity. He stroked his graying beard. A life for 3 mouths, he mused, the words slithering out. A poor exchange, woman. Mara pressed her forehead to the dirt. They are good girls. Strong. They will work. I taught them. Her voice broke. Please. He did not answer for a long moment. The sun beat down. A horse stamped impatiently. Then, a curt nod to one of his men. "See to her." Mara's head snapped up, a wild hope flaring in her eyes, quickly doused by the man's rough grip on her arm. She didn't cry out. She looked back at her daughters, one last, fierce, loving look. "Be brave," she mouthed. Then she was gone, dragged towards a squat building from which no pleasant sounds ever emerged. The daughters remained, frozen. The world had tilted, then shattered. Lila pulled Ilara tighter. Sarah stared at the spot where her mother had knelt, as if imprinting it onto her soul. The townsfolk of Blackwood Creek, those few who had business at Thorn's periphery, averted their eyes. Such scenes were not uncommon. Such pleas, rarely heeded in the way Mara hoped. On the edge of the scrubland, half hidden by a copse of withered pines, a man watched. Elias. He was a phantom in Blackwood Creek, seen only when necessity drove him to its dusty main street for salt or shot. His face was weathered leather, his eyes held the vast, lonely quiet of the high plains where he lived. He'd lost his own, a wife, a son, to the fever that swept through years ago. He understood the landscape of grief. He saw the girls, small figures of absolute desolation. He saw Thorn's men begin to eye them, like wolves circling weakened prey. He did not speak. He rarely did. But his hand, calloused and strong, rested on the worn stock of the rifle that was always with him. He watched as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of blood and bruising. The girls hadn't moved. They were a tableau of silent despair. When Thorn's men finally sauntered towards them, intentions crude and obvious in their grins, Elias stepped from the pines. He didn't hurry. He simply moved into their path, a solid, unyielding presence. The rifle was not raised, but its presence was enough. The men hesitated. They knew of Elias, the recluse. A man best left alone. They muttered, spat, and retreated into the deepening shadows. Elias did not look at the girls directly. He walked a short distance away, towards an outcrop of rock, and Saturday. He was a sentinel, carved from the twilight. He remained there as the stars emerged, cold and distant, and as the first chill of night settled over the land. The only sound was Ilara's muffled weeping. Lila finally understood. This silent man was not a threat. He was something else. When the moon was high, he rose. He walked towards them, his steps measured, unthreatening. He stopped a few feet away. He didn't speak. He simply gestured with his head, a slight inclination towards the dark expanse behind him, towards the unknown. Lila looked at Sarah. Sarah looked back, her young face old with fear but also a flicker of something else, a desperate, fragile hope. Ilara was too terrified to look at anyone. Lila took a breath. Her mother had said, "Be brave." She took Ilara's hand, then Sarah's. she took a step towards the silent man, into the darkness he offered. The journey was a silent pilgrimage into a stark, unforgiving land. Elias walked ahead, leading a single, patient mule laden with meager supplies. The girls followed, their bare feet stumbling on the rocky, uneven ground. Lila kept Ilara close, a small, trembling bird under her wing. Sarah walked with a strange, fixed intensity, her eye scanning the landscape, memorizing the twisted shapes of juniper trees, the sudden dip of a ravine, the way the moonlight cast long, skeletal shadows. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, a mournful sound that seemed to echo the hollowness inside them. No words were exchanged. Elias did not look back to hurry them, nor did he offer comfort. His presence was a fact, like the mountains that loomed on the horizon, vast and indifferent. Occasionally, he would stop, gesture for them to rest, and offer them water from his canteen. They drank, their throats raw from unshed tears and dust. Lila would always ensure Ilara drank first, then Sarah, before taking a sip herself. He watched this small ritual, his face unreadable. His ranch, when they finally reached it hours later, as the first pale light of dawn bled across the eastern sky, was not a place of welcome. It was a collection of weathered buildings clinging to the side of a barren hill, a small, sturdy cabin, a leaning barn, a corral holding 2 horses that watched their approach with mild interest. The land around it was harsh, windswept, seemingly barren. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like the end of the world. Elias led them to the cabin. It was small, consisting of 2 rooms. The main room held a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and 2 chairs. A few pots and pans hung from pegs on the wall. It smelled of wood smoke, old leather, and solitude. He gestured to a narrow door. Here, his voice was raspy from disuse, the first word he'd spoken to them. Lila pushed the door open. It was a small, Spartan room, containing a single narrow cot with a thin mattress and a neatly folded blanket. A small, unglazed window looked out onto the empty expanse. This, she realized with a sinking heart, had likely been his son's room. He left them then, retreating to the main room. They heard the clink of metal as he prepared a fire. The girls huddled together on the cot, the silence of the room pressing in on them. Fear was a cold knot in Lila's stomach. They had exchanged one cage for another, albeit one without visible bars or leering guards. But the master of this cage was an unknown quantity, a man of profound silence and unknowable intentions. Later, Elias brought them food, a bowl of thin stew and a piece of coarse bread each. He set it on the floor just inside their room, then retreated without a word. They ate ravenously, huddled together. Ilara, exhausted and overwhelmed, fell asleep in Lila's arms. Sarah stared out the small window, her expression thoughtful. Lila stayed awake, listening to the sounds of the cabin, the crackle of the fire, the occasional creak of the floorboards as Elias moved, the sigh of the wind outside. It was a lonely, desolate sound. Days bled into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun. Elias worked from dawn till dusk, tending his horses, mending fences, chopping wood. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his actions deliberate and economical. He never spoke to them unless absolutely necessary, and then only in monosyllables. Would water he would leave food for them, always ensuring they had enough. He never asked for anything in return. He mended a broken hinge on their door. He left a pile of firewood stacked neatly beside their threshold. Small, practical acts of something. It wasn't kindness as they understood it. There was no softness in it. But it was provision. It was shelter. Lila began to venture out of their room, first just to fetch water from the well, then to sit on the cabin step, watching him work. Sarah would join her, sometimes scratching patterns in the dirt with a stick. Ilara remained mostly inside, a shadow clinging to the corners of their small room. One evening, as the sun cast long shadows, a lone rider was visible on the distant track that led towards Blackwood Creek. Elias stopped his work, his body tensing, his eyes fixed on the figure until it disappeared from view. He said nothing, but the air thickened with an unspoken anxiety. The town, Lila knew, was out there. And Master Thorn. The silence of the ranch was vast, but it was not empty. It was filled with unspoken fears, with the ghosts of the past, and with the fragile, tentative beginnings of an understanding that transcended words. Months crawled by, measured in the slow turning of the seasons. The biting winds of early spring gave way to the relentless sun of summer. A fragile routine settled over the remote ranch. Elias continued his silent ministrations. He left a roughly carved wooden bird on the windowsill of the girls' room one morning. Ilara, who had barely made a sound since their arrival, was found later clutching it, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. She whispered, so low only Lila heard, "Bird." It was the first word she'd spoken in weeks, a tiny crack in the wall of her silence. Lila, driven by a need for purpose, began to help with small chores. She collected eggs from the few scrawny chickens Elias kept, swept the cabin floor, mended their tattered clothes with a needle and coarse thread Elias had left on the table with a bolt of plain calico fabric. Her stitches were clumsy at first, but grew steadier with practice. She fashioned new, simple dresses for herself and her sisters, the calico rough against their skin but clean, a small dignity restored. Sarah, ever observant, took to drawing. Lacking paper, she used scraps of flattened bark or smooth stones, sketching with bits of charcoal from the fire pit. She drew the harsh landscape, the stoic horses, Elias's hands as he worked, calloused and capable. She would leave her drawings where he might see them, on the table, by the woodpile. He never commented, but sometimes Lila would see him pause, his gaze lingering on one of Sarah's sketches for a moment before he moved on. One day, he left a small, perfectly smooth piece of slate and a few nubs of chalk near where Sarah usually sat. Her eyes widened, and a rare, fleeting smile touched her lips. Ilara, emboldened by the small wooden bird, started to venture further from Lila's side. She would follow Elias at a distance as he did his chores, a tiny shadow mimicking his movements. He never acknowledged her directly, but once, when she stumbled, he paused in his work, waiting until she had picked herself up before continuing. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. The silence between them remained, but it was no longer heavy with fear. It was a shared quiet, a space where understanding could grow without the need for words. Trust, like a desert flower, was slowly, tentatively, blooming in the arid soil of their shared existence. But the outside world, with its judgments and its dangers, still loomed. Elias had to make infrequent trips to Blackwood Creek for supplies. Each time he left, a cold dread settled over the girls. They would watch him ride away, a solitary figure disappearing over the rise, and pray for his safe return. In town, he faced the narrowed eyes and hushed whispers of the townsfolk. Preacher Davis, a man whose piety was as starched as his collar, often delivered pointed sermons about the company one keeps, his gaze sweeping over Elias. There are those, the preacher would thunder, who stray from the flock, who harbor elements of questionable origin. The Lord sees all, and judgment will surely follow. Gossip followed Elias like his own shadow. Those girls of thorns, what's he doing with them way out there? No good can come of it. Elias endured it all with his usual stoicism. He bought his salt, his flour, his shot, and occasionally, something extra, a bit of ribbon, a small bag of dried apples. These he would leave on the table for the girls, without explanation. One afternoon, Lila found him sitting outside the barn, carefully mending a small, worn wooden horse, its paint faded, one leg broken. He worked with a gentle precision she hadn't seen before. He didn't look up as she approached, but he didn't stop his work either. She recognized the toy. It was much like one her own father had carved for her younger brother, lost years ago. She saw then a glimpse of the man beneath the silence, a flicker of the profound loss that mirrored her own. He finished the repair, the new wooden peg barely visible. He set the mended horse on the ground, near where Ilara often played. Later, Lila saw her sister tentatively touch it, then pick it up, cradling it gently. That evening, as Elias sat by the fire, mending a piece of tack, Ilara walked slowly towards him. She stopped a few feet away, clutching the wooden horse. She looked at him, then at the horse, then back at him. Then, in a small, clear voice, she said, "Thank you." Elias stopped his work. He looked at Ilara, truly looked at her, for a long moment. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He did not speak. He did not need to. The crack in the silence had widened. The relentless heat of summer eventually softened into the cooler, crisper days of autumn. The landscape around the ranch, once a uniform brown, was now flecked with the gold of dying grasses and the deep red of scrub oak. A sense of cautious peace had settled over its inhabitants. Ilara's voice, once rediscovered, grew stronger. She chatted to the chickens, to her wooden horse, and sometimes, in short, hesitant sentences, to Lila and Sarah. She even dared to ask Elias a direct question one morning, horse-hungry, as he led his animals to the trough. Elias, startled, had actually grunted something that might have been an affirmative. Sarah's drawings became more detailed, more confident. She started to use the crushed juices of berries for color, bringing a surprising vibrancy to her depictions of the stark world around them. She even drew Elias, not as a forbidding figure, but as a man of quiet strength, his face in shadow, his hands always busy. She left one such drawing on his sleeping roll. He didn't mention it, but Lila noticed he moved it carefully to a ledge above the fireplace, out of harm's way. Lila herself felt a change. The constant knot of fear in her belly had loosened. She moved with more assurance, her shoulders less hunched. She found a quiet satisfaction in the rhythm of their days, in the simple tasks that sustained them. The ranch, once a symbol of their isolation, now felt like a refuge. But the world beyond their small haven had not forgotten them. Riders, bearing Master Thorn's insignia, were seen with increasing frequency on the distant trails. Their presence was a cold reminder of the debt Thorn believed he was owed. One afternoon, as a dark, bruised sky threatened a storm, Elias returned from a short ride, his face grimmer than usual. He didn't speak, but his actions were clipped, efficient. He checked the fastenings on the cabin shutters, examined his rifle with a meticulous care, and brought in extra firewood. The girls watched, a familiar anxiety prickling their skin. They knew, without him saying a word, that the fragile peace was about to be shattered. The storm broke with a savage fury that evening, the wind howling like a banshee, rain lashing against the cabin. Inside, the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Elias sat by the hearth, cleaning his rifle, his movements precise and deliberate. Lila, Sarah, and Ilara were huddled together on their cot, listening to the tempest rage outside. Suddenly, above the roar of the wind, came another sound, the heavy thud of hooves, the jingle of harnesses. Lila's heart leaped into her throat. Sarah gasped, her eyes wide with terror. Elias was instantly on his feet, rifle in hand, moving towards the door. He peered through a crack in the shutters. "Stay down," he rasped, his voice low and urgent. Through the driving rain, they could see them, 3 riders, cloaked and menacing, their horses uneasy in the storm. One, a burly man with a cruel face Lila vaguely remembered from Thorn's compound, dismounted and pounded on the door. "Elias! We know you're in there. Thorn wants his property." It was Harker, Thorn's chief enforcer. Elias didn't answer. He stood like stone, listening. Harker kicked the door. "Open up, old man, or we'll burn you out." Lila felt Ilara trembling violently beside her. She pulled her sisters closer, trying to shield them with her own body. The fear was back, cold and sharp, but this time, it was laced with something new, a defiant anger. These men would not take them. Not again. Harker let out a string of curses and then, with a splintering crash, the door buckled as he threw his shoulder against it. He stumbled into the room, rain and wind swirling in behind him, his 2 companions close at his heels. His eyes, malevolent in the firelight, fixed on the girls. "There they are," he snarled, a predatory grin spreading across his face. He took a step towards them. Elias moved then, swift and silent as a shadow, placing himself between Harker and the girls. The rifle was level, aimed squarely at Harker's chest. "Go," Elias said, his voice a low growl, devoid of any inflection, yet carrying an unmistakable threat. Harker laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Just one old man? Against 3 of us, He gestured to his companions, who fanned out, their hands on their weapons. Just as Harker lunged for Lila, a small, high-pitched scream pierced the tension. No. It was Elara. She stood bolt upright, her small face contorted with a mixture of terror and fury, her tiny fists clenched. Leave her alone. The word, the defiance, stunned everyone into momentary silence. Harker paused, his cruel grin faltering. Even Elias seemed surprised, his gaze flickering towards the small girl. In that instant, something shifted. The storm outside raged, but inside the small cabin, another storm, one of courage, was just beginning to gather. The fragile silence hung heavy, broken only by the howl of the wind and Elara's ragged breathing. Harker, recovering from his surprise, sneered. A little kitten has claws, does she? He took another menacing step. But Elara's cry had ignited something in Lila. The image of her mother, kneeling in the dust, flashed before her eyes. The promise she'd made. Be brave. She pushed Sarah gently behind her and stepped forward, placing herself beside Elias, facing Harker. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice, when she spoke, was surprisingly steady. She said no. We all say no. You will not take us. Harker's eyes narrowed. Brave words, girl. But Thorn wants what's his. Sarah, trembling but resolute, moved to stand on Lila's other side. She didn't speak, but her small, defiant posture, her unwavering gaze fixed on Harker, spoke volumes. 3 small figures, and 1 silent man, against Thorn's brutality. Just as Harker was about to order his men forward, new sounds intruded, more horses, shouts. The door, already battered, was thrust open wider, and a new group spilled into the small cabin, bringing with them the smell of wet wool and righteous indignation. It was Preacher Davis, his face flushed, followed by a handful of townsmen, their expressions a mixture of fear and grim determination. Master Thorn himself pushed through them, his bulk filling the doorway, his eyes like chips of ice. Well, Elias, Thorn's voice was smooth, dangerously calm. Quite the hornet's nest you've stirred up. Hiding my property, are we? Preacher Davis stepped forward, his Bible held aloft like a shield. Elias, this is an abomination. These girls belong with Master Thorn. It is the law. It is decent. He glared at the girls. You should be ashamed, consorting with this recluse, this outcast. Lila felt a surge of cold anger. Ashamed. Her voice, though not loud, cut through the preacher's pronouncements. We were starving. Our mother offered her life to Master Thorn to spare us. Her gaze fixed on Thorn, accusing, unwavering. He took her life. And he would have taken us too, for his purposes. A shocked murmur ran through the townsmen. Some looked away, unable to meet Lila's gaze. Thorn's face tightened. Lies. The woman was addled. Sarah found her voice then, clear and strong despite her youth. It is not a lie. We saw. We heard. This man, she gestured to Elias, he took us in. He gave us food. Shelter. Warmth. He asked for nothing. He showed us kindness when no one else would. Elias had not moved, his rifle still steady, his eyes fixed on Thorn. He said nothing, but his presence was a shield around the girls. Preacher Davis spluttered. Kindness? Harboring runaways? Defying lawful authority? This is not kindness, child, it is sin. Then, a woman's voice, firm and unexpected, cut through the preacher's tirade. It was Martha, a homesteader from the edge of town, a woman who had buried 2 of her own children. Her face was etched with sorrow, but her eyes were clear. Preacher, she said, her voice resonating with quiet authority. These are children. Look at them. Are they property? Or are they God's creatures, deserving of compassion? She looked directly at Thorn. What kind of man makes war on frightened children? Thorn's composure began to crack. He saw the doubt in the eyes of the townsman. He saw Martha's quiet condemnation. He looked at Elias, at the unwavering rifle, at the man's eyes that promised to fight to the death. Elias finally spoke, his voice low, each word dropping like a stone into a deep well. They stay. Here there was no room for negotiation in his tone. It was a statement of absolute, unyielding fact. Thorn glared, his face contorted with rage and thwarted greed. He looked from Elias to the girls, to the increasingly uneasy faces of the townsmen. He knew he had miscalculated. The storm, the isolation, Elias's unexpected ferocity, and now, the girls' voices, their damning testimony, it was too much. With a snarl, he turned. This isn't over, Elias. He pushed his way out of the cabin, his men and a visibly deflated Preacher Davis trailing in his wake. Their horses thundered away, swallowed by the storm and the night. Silence descended again, but this time it was different. It was the silence of a battle won, of a sanctuary defended. Lila, Sarah, and Elara looked at Elias. He slowly lowered the rifle. His face was still grim, but Lila thought she saw a flicker of something else in his eyes, relief, perhaps even a harsh, unspoken pride. He looked at the three of them, a long, searching look. Then, he gave a curt nod, almost imperceptible. He turned to the fire, poking it back to life. The wind still howled outside, but inside the small cabin, a fragile warmth spread. They had faced their monster, and they had not been consumed. The land, which had once seemed so hostile, now felt like an ally, its wildness a protective embrace. Autumn deepened, the days growing shorter. The ranch, once a place of fear and uncertainty, became a true home. They worked together, Elias and the three girls, a strange, silent family forged in hardship and shared survival. Lila learned to manage the small household with a quiet competence. Sarah's drawings filled the cabin, her charcoal sketches bringing beauty to the rough-hewn walls. Elara's laughter, once a forgotten sound, now echoed through the small valley as she played, the mended wooden horse her constant companion. Elias remained a man of few words, but his silence was now a comfort, a steady presence in their lives. He taught them to read the land, to track animals, to identify edible plants. He showed them how to mend a fence, how to shoe a horse, how to survive. One evening, as they sat around the table sharing a simple meal of stew and freshly baked bread, a rare thing now that Lila had learned to bake, Sarah looked up at Elias. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes shining. For everything, Elias met her gaze. He didn't speak, but a small, almost shy smile touched his lips. It was enough. They had found their peace, a defiant, hard-won peace, in the heart of the wilderness. They were no longer lost girls, but survivors, their voices reclaimed, their spirits mending, under the watchful eye of a silent protector who had, in saving them, perhaps begun to save himself. The wind still whispered through the pines, but now it sang a song of resilience, of hope, of a family found in the most unlikely of places. We hope you were moved by this story of courage and resilience. If stories like this touch your heart and inspire you, please consider subscribing to our channel for more uplifting content. Don't forget to like this video and share it with others who might find strength in these tales. And please, leave a comment below. What part of Lila, Sarah, and Elara's journey resonated with you the most? Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to light. Thank you for watching.